For 25 years, I thought I knew my wife. Karen and I had built a life together, 2 kids, a home filled with memories, and a marriage that had weathered every storm. We were high school sweethearts, partners in everything. And when our daughters left for college, I saw it as a new beginning. A chance for us to focus on each other again, to rediscover what had made us fall in love in the first place. But it turns out she was cheating on me. At those damn writers' seminars. It's kind of a cliché. And what did I do? I could have confronted her. But I didn't. Instead, I made the only choice that I think is right. By the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. The man she had once called her husband had disappeared. And when fate brought us face to face again, years later, she learned the hardest lesson of all. Some betrayals don't get second chances. This is the story of how I walked away and never looked back. But let's go back a little bit to see where it all started. I was 17 when I met Karen. It was my senior year of high school, and she was the new girl transferred in from another district when her dad got a job in town. She sat behind me in calculus, tapping her pencil against her notebook while she tried to figure out derivatives. I wasn't much of a math whiz either, but I knew enough to help. That's how it started. One afternoon turned into another. Study sessions stretched into long talks in the library, and before I knew it, I was looking forward to every moment I could steal with her. She was funny, smart, and had this way of making the most ordinary things feel important. By the time we graduated, I knew I wanted to spend my life with her. We stayed together through college. She studied English, dreaming of writing novels one day, while I went into engineering. It wasn't always easy. We had our struggles, long nights, different schedules, the usual growing pains. But we made it work. At 23, I proposed to her on a quiet summer night, standing under the oak tree in her parents' backyard. Nothing fancy, just the two of us, the cicadas buzzing in the distance, the weight of the moment settling between us. She said yes before I even finished asking. We got married a year later, fresh out of college, full of dreams and plans for the future. For a quarter of a century, I built my life around Karen. I was an engineer, practical, logical, the kind of man who liked things to make sense. And for a long time, our life together did. We had the kind of marriage that people admired. High school sweethearts who had beaten the odds, raised 2 incredible daughters, and built a comfortable life together. Karen was my best friend. She was warm, smart, and had a way of making the simplest things feel special. A Sunday morning coffee on the porch, a walk through our neighborhood, the way she'd reach for my hand in the car, small moments that I thought meant everything. When our daughters left for college, I looked at it as the beginning of a new chapter. For years, we had been parents first and a couple second. Now, with just the two of us again, I imagined we'd rediscover each other. Maybe take a trip somewhere we'd always talked about. Maybe start a new routine, just us. I wanted that. I thought she did too. But looking back, I see it now. The shift. The signs I didn't want to acknowledge. It started small, changes in her schedule, a little more time spent on her writing. Karen had always loved stories, had always wanted to be a writer, and I had supported that dream. She taught high school English, but in her free time, she was part of a writing group. At first, it was just a hobby, something she did with a few other teachers and book lovers in town. But then the workshops started. They were the biggest red flag. Karen had always talked about wanting to get away for a weekend to focus on her writing, but she never actually did it, until now. One day, she came home beaming, talking about a weekend retreat organized by someone from her workshop. "It's up in the mountains," she said, her voice practically bubbling with excitement. "A cabin, no distractions, just a bunch of us writers working on our projects. It's exactly what I need." She had already signed up before even mentioning it to me. Something about the way she told me didn't sit right. It wasn't just excitement. It was nervous excitement, like she was waiting to see how I'd react. "When is it?" I asked. "This weekend." I blinked. "So, 2 days from now?" She nodded, biting her lip. "Yeah, I know it's short notice, but these opportunities don't come around often." I forced a smile. "I guess I'll just have to entertain myself then." She laughed, a little too quickly. "You'll survive." And that was that. That weekend, she packed up and left early Saturday morning. I helped load her suitcase into the car, and as she leaned in to give me a quick kiss on the cheek, she barely looked me in the eye. I stood on the driveway, watching her drive off, feeling like something had just shifted in our marriage. She came back Sunday evening, glowing. That was the only way to describe it. She was energized, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. But something was off. "Looks like the retreat went well," I said as she set her bag down in the hallway. She stretched, letting out a happy sigh. It was incredible, just being around so many creative minds, bouncing ideas off each other, pushing each other to be better. I feel inspired. I smiled, but there was a tightness in my chest I couldn't ignore. She looked different, more alive, more refreshed. It wasn't just excitement. It was something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. I didn't ask too many questions that night. I figured she'd offer details on her own if she wanted to. But as the days passed, she barely spoke about it. No stories, no funny moments, nothing. Just vague comments about productive writing time. Then she signed up for another retreat. And another. At first, they were once every few months. Then they became monthly. Each time, she'd come back with that same glow, that same restless energy. But when I asked about what she had worked on, she never seemed to have anything concrete to show me. It's all just rough drafts right now, she'd say. Still in the brainstorming phase. It didn't make sense. If she was spending entire weekends holed up in a cabin with other writers, wouldn't she have pages and pages of new material? Wouldn't she want to share them with me? But she didn't. Weekend retreats, late nights at the library, meetings with mentors who, apparently, had great insight into the craft. She spoke about it with a spark in her eye that I hadn't seen in a long time. And I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. I was proud of Karen. She had spent so many years focused on the kids, on us, on making our house a home. If this was something that brought her joy, who was I to get in the way? But the longer it went on, the more I realized something was off. She started keeping her phone close, too close. Before, it would sit on the kitchen counter, forgotten half the time. Now it was always in her hand, always face down. If it buzzed while we were together, she'd tilt the screen away or leave the room to answer. She began dressing differently too. Nothing drastic, but noticeable. New outfits, ones she hadn't worn before. More perfume. Little things that, on their own, might not mean much, but together, they started to form a picture I didn't want to see. Then there was the way she looked at me. Or rather, the way she stopped looking at me. We had been through rough patches before. No marriage is perfect all the time. But this was different. There was a distance in her eyes, like she was somewhere else even when she was sitting right next to me. I told myself it was just the transition, that we were adjusting to life as empty nesters. That she was just excited about her writing, and I needed to be more supportive. I wanted to believe that. But then came the nights when she would come home late, smelling of wine, her laughter a little too bright, like she was carrying a secret she wasn't ready to share. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I asked her about it. "You've been spending a lot of time at these workshops," I said carefully, keeping my voice even. "It seems like you're really diving into this writing thing." She smiled, too quick, too practiced. "Yeah, it's been great. It's inspiring to be around other creative people. We push each other, you know." I nodded, chewing my food slowly. "I get that. I feel like we haven't had much time together lately. Maybe we should take a weekend trip somewhere, just us." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "That sounds nice," she said, but there was hesitation in her voice. "It's just, things are kind of busy right now. There's a big event coming up, and I promised I'd be there." I let it go. I didn't want to be the controlling husband, the one who made her choose between her passion and our marriage. But I felt it in my gut, a nagging, twisting feeling that something wasn't right. The moment that really set me on edge happened on a Friday night. I had gotten home from work early and decided to surprise her by making dinner. Nothing fancy, just a steak and some roasted potatoes, the way she liked. I even picked up a bottle of her favorite wine. She had said she'd be home around 7. By 8:30, I was sitting alone at the table, the candles burning low. I sent her a text. "Everything okay? Thought we were having dinner." No response. By 9, I had blown out the candles and put the food away. By 10, I was sitting on the couch, staring at the door. When she finally walked in at 10:30, she looked surprised to see me still up. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly messy. "Hey," she said too casually. "Why are you still awake?" "I thought we had dinner plans," I said, my voice calm but firm. She blinked, like she had completely forgotten. "Oh, God, Andrew. I'm so sorry. The workshop ran late, and then we went out for drinks, and I just lost track of time." I studied her face, the way she avoided my eyes. "Did you check your phone?" She hesitated for just a second too long. It was on silent. I didn't argue. I didn't push. But that was the night I stopped ignoring the truth. That was the night I realized my wife had built a new world for herself, and I wasn't a part of it anymore. I don't know the exact moment I decided to hire a private investigator. Maybe it was the way Karen smiled at her phone more than she smiled at me. Maybe it was the sudden shift in her schedule, the weekends away that left her coming home looking refreshed and distant at the same time. Maybe it was the fact that every single bone in my body was screaming at me that something was wrong. Whatever it was, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. For weeks, I had been watching the pieces fall into place, and no matter how much I wanted to believe that I was just being paranoid, I couldn't lie to myself any longer. Karen was hiding something, and if I was going to find out what it was, I needed help. I started by looking online for local private investigators. I didn't want to pick someone from a big agency, someone flashy or expensive. I wanted someone discreet, someone who had been around long enough to know how to find the truth without drawing attention. That's how I found Mike Calloway. His website wasn't anything fancy, just a basic page with a phone number and a short list of services. Surveillance, background checks, infidelity investigations. That last one made my stomach twist. I stared at the screen for a long time before I finally picked up the phone. Mike answered on the second ring. His voice was rough, like a guy who had spent a few too many years smoking and drinking cheap coffee. "This is Calloway." I swallowed hard. Yeah. Hi. I'm looking to hire someone for a personal matter." There was a pause. "You think your wife is cheating?" Hearing it said out loud hit me like a punch to the gut. I exhaled slowly. "I don't know, but something's not right. Meet me at the diner on 8th and Madison. Tomorrow at noon." And just like that, the call ended. The next day, I sat across from Mike in a booth at a greasy little diner downtown. He was an older guy, maybe late 50s, wearing a leather jacket that had seen better days. He had a notebook and a cup of black coffee in front of him, and he didn't waste time with small talk. "Tell me everything," he said, flipping open the notebook. So I did. I told him about the writing retreats, the late nights, the way she had started guarding her phone like it held state secrets. I told him how she had stopped looking at me the way she used to, how she came home from those weekends away with a spark in her that had nothing to do with me. Mike listened without interrupting, just nodding here and there as he jotted down notes. When I was finished, he leaned back and folded his arms. "All right, here's how this works. I follow her. I track her movements. I document everything. If there's something to find, I'll find it." I swallowed hard. "And if there isn't?" He shrugged. "Then you'll know for sure." That should have been a comforting thought, but it wasn't. I handed him a recent picture of Karen and the details of her next retreat, where she was going, when she was leaving, and the name of the workshop leader who had organized it. Mike slid the picture into his notebook. "I'll be in touch." And just like that, the waiting began. The weekend of the retreat, Karen left early Saturday morning, just like always. I helped her load up her car, kissed her goodbye, and watched her drive away, my stomach a knot of nerves. Mike checked in that evening with a short text. "Got her. We'll update soon." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind played out a dozen different scenarios, each one worse than the last. The next afternoon, I got another message. "Need to meet. Tomorrow. Same diner." I sat in that booth the next day, my fingers gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. Mike slid into the seat across from me, tossed a manila envelope onto the table, and sighed. "Well," he said, rubbing his temple. "You were right." I stared at the envelope, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't reach for it. "Not yet. Tell me." She checked into the cabin like she said she would, he began. Only she wasn't alone. I clenched my jaw. She met up with a guy. Mid-40s, tall, dark hair. I ran his plates. His name's David Connolly. He's in the workshop with her. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to process that. "How do you know it wasn't just work-related?" Mike sighed. "Because I saw them together. I saw how they looked at each other, how they touched, how she leaned into him when they talked, how he put his hand on the small of her back like he'd done it 1,000 times before." The words felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "She spent the entire weekend with him," he continued. "They were never apart. If they were in a group, they gravitated toward each other. If they went for a walk, they went alone. Every single meal, every single moment that wasn't in front of other people, it was just them." I exhaled sharply. "Did she?" "She kissed him," Mike said bluntly. "More than once." I felt my stomach drop. He tapped the envelope. "Everything's in here. Pictures, timestamps. You don't have to take my word for it." I reached for the envelope with shaking hands. I already knew what was inside, but some part of me still needed to see it for myself. I pulled out the stack of photographs and flipped through them. There she was, my wife, smiling, laughing. Sitting close to a man I had never met, her body angled toward his like he was the only person in the world. Then I saw it. A picture of her standing by the lake, her hands on his chest, his arms around her waist, their lips pressed together. I sucked in a sharp breath and slammed the pictures face down on the table. Mike watched me carefully. I know this ain't easy. I let out a bitter laugh, my chest tight. Yeah, you could say that. He nodded. So, what now? I didn't answer right away. I felt like my entire world had just shifted. The woman I had built a life with, the person I had trusted for more than 25 years, had been sneaking around behind my back. And now, I had the proof. I could confront her. I could yell, demand explanations, make her admit what she'd done. But as I stared at those pictures, something inside me settled. I didn't need to ask her anything. I already knew the truth. And now, it was my turn to decide what happened next. I didn't say a word to Karen after I saw the photos. I wanted to. The second I left the diner, I felt like I was going to explode. I wanted to go home, slam the pictures down on the table, and demand answers. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized she was caught. I wanted her to squirm, to stutter through excuses, to feel even an ounce of the humiliation she had put me through. But I didn't, because I knew exactly how that would go. She would cry. She would tell me it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. Maybe she'd try to turn it around on me, say that I had been distant, that she was just looking for something I wasn't giving her. Maybe she would promise to end it, swear up and down that she still loved me. And then what? I'd forgive her? Let her stay? Live the rest of my life wondering if she was lying every time she said she was going to a workshop or meeting up with friends. No, that wasn't happening. I wasn't going to fight for a marriage that she had already thrown away. So instead, I planned my exit. Step 1. The money. The first thing I did was secure my finances. Karen and I had a joint account, but we also had separate ones for work deposits and personal spending. I had never really thought about it much. Karen handled most of the bills, and I had always trusted her to manage things responsibly. That trust was gone now. I went to the bank the morning after meeting with Mike. I moved half of our joint savings into my personal account, nothing too drastic, just enough that I wouldn't be left stranded when everything came crashing down. Then, I set up a new account at a different bank entirely. I had never been the kind of guy who kept cash hidden away, but now, I saw the value in having money somewhere she couldn't touch. I started making small withdrawals over the next couple of weeks, never enough to raise suspicion. A few hundred here, a few hundred there, until I had a decent amount stashed away. I also checked our credit cards. Karen had opened a second card a few years back, one we rarely used except for emergencies. I logged in and saw months of transactions, restaurant bills, hotel stays, charges from places she had never mentioned. I didn't even need to guess who those dinners and hotel rooms were for. That night, as Karen sat across from me at the dinner table, scrolling through her phone like I didn't exist, I made a quiet decision. She thought she was getting away with it. She had no idea I was already halfway out the door. Step 2. A new home. I wasn't just leaving. I was disappearing. I didn't want a long, drawn-out divorce battle. I didn't want months of arguments, splitting up furniture, deciding who got what. I wanted to be gone before she even knew what was happening. So I found a place. A small rental house on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, but clean, private. A friend of mine from work had a cousin who was a landlord, and after a quick conversation, I had a lease signed within a few days. I kept it quiet. I didn't change my mailing address. I didn't start moving things right away. I didn't do anything that might tip Karen off. Instead, I made a list. A mental inventory of what was mine, what I wanted to take with me, and what I was willing to leave behind. I wasn't interested in fighting over furniture or decorations. The house we had built together didn't feel like mine anymore. Anyway, what I cared about were the things that mattered. My personal documents. My tools. A few sentimental items, old letters, photo albums, gifts from my daughters. Everything else? She could have it. It wouldn't mean anything to me once I was gone. Step 3. Preparing the divorce papers. I wasn't just walking away. I was ending this for good. That meant divorce papers. I wasn't going to wait around, let Karen cry her way out of it, or listen to whatever excuses she had planned. I wanted everything ready before she even realized I was gone. So, I met with a lawyer. A quiet office downtown, nothing fancy. Just a guy who specialized in making things quick and painless. I told him exactly what I wanted, a clean break, no drawn-out battles, no unnecessary arguments. He looked over our financials, shook his head, and said, "She's not going to like this." "I don't care," I told him. He drafted the papers within a few days, a simple, uncontested divorce filing. I made sure it was ironclad. She wasn't getting the house. She wasn't touching my savings. She wasn't walking away with a penny more than what the law required. I signed everything, paid the lawyer, and took the finalized papers home. Step 4. Covering my tracks. The last thing I needed to do was make sure Karen couldn't follow me. That meant shutting down my social media, changing my email passwords, even setting up a new phone plan. I didn't want her showing up at my new place, begging for explanations. I didn't want her trying to guilt me into staying. I didn't want her thinking there was any way to fix what she had broken. So I started pulling back. At first, I just seemed busy. I worked late more often. I didn't text her as much. I made excuses when she wanted to go out, little things to make my absence feel normal. She barely noticed. She was too distracted, too wrapped up in whatever was going on with David Connolly. And honestly, that made it easier. Because the day was coming. The day I would walk out and never look back. And she wouldn't even see it coming. Karen left early Saturday morning, just like always. She was in a hurry this time, barely stopping to say goodbye. I stood in the doorway, watching her toss her bag into the back seat and adjust the mirror. She didn't look back at me, didn't linger the way she used to before leaving. "I'll be back Sunday night," she called over her shoulder. I nodded. "Have fun." She smiled, but it wasn't real. It was that polite, distracted smile she had started giving me when she wasn't really listening. Then she pulled out of the driveway, turned the corner, and was gone. And that was it. That was the last time she would ever see me in this house. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty street, letting the silence settle over me. Then I turned around, walked inside, and got to work. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, it felt surreal. I had packed a few things in advance, small boxes hidden in the garage, a duffel bag with essentials stashed in my truck. But the bulk of it had to be done now, while she was gone. I moved quickly, methodically. I wasn't sentimental about it. Clothes, toiletries, important documents, my laptop, a few framed photos not of Karen, but of my daughters. Things that actually meant something to me. The hardest part was deciding what to leave behind. I ran my hands over the couch where we had spent countless nights watching movies together. The dining table where we had shared family dinners, birthdays, long conversations about nothing. The bed where we had once fallen asleep side by side, dreaming of a future together. But none of it felt like mine anymore. This house had become a lie, just like our marriage. I left my wedding ring on the bathroom counter. I didn't need it where I was going. Once everything I cared about was packed, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my phone. First, I called my boss. I had already arranged to transition into a remote position, something I had been working on for the past few months. The official story was that I wanted to move out of state for a fresh start. My boss was a good guy. He didn't ask questions. "Appreciate the heads up," he said. "We'll finalize the paperwork Monday." Next, I wiped my social media accounts. Facebook, gone. Twitter, gone. LinkedIn, gone. I changed my email. Set up a new phone plan. The last thing I did was block Karen's number. It was strange, knowing that she would try to call me soon, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow when she was on her way home, expecting me to be waiting for her. She'd dial my number. She'd hear it go straight to voicemail. And that would be the first moment she realized something was wrong. The truck was packed. My keys were on the counter. My entire life in this house was over. I took one last look around, but I didn't feel sad. I felt free. Then I walked out the front door, locked it behind me, and drove away. I didn't look back. Karen came home late Sunday night, just like always. She pulled into the driveway, probably exhausted from her riding retreat, expecting to walk into the same house she had left 2 days ago. Maybe she had already started running through her usual routine in her head, drop her bags by the door, grab a quick shower, scroll through her phone in bed while barely acknowledging me. Except this time, there was no one waiting for her. She stepped inside and flicked on the light, and that's when she must have felt it. The difference. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Something was wrong. She took a few steps in and looked around. At first, maybe she didn't notice what had changed. Maybe she tossed her purse onto the counter like always, already half distracted by whatever message she was expecting on her phone. But then it hit her. The space felt empty. The framed photos of us on the mantel gone. The coat I always kept by the door gone. The little everyday things that made up my presence in this house gone. Karen called my name. Once. Then again, louder this time. Silence. She walked through the living room, into the kitchen, down the hallway, flicking on lights as she went. Maybe at first, she thought I had stepped out, maybe gone to the store or out for a drive. Then she saw the bedroom. Half the closet, empty. My dresser drawers, open and cleared out. No shoes by the door. No razor by the sink. No trace of me left in the place we had shared for 25 years. And then she saw the envelope. It was sitting right in the middle of the kitchen table. My name, written in my handwriting. Inside, she found exactly what she deserved, divorce papers. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but I could picture it. The way she'd stare at the papers, trying to make sense of what she was holding. The way her hands might shake as she flipped through them, scanning the words but not really reading them because her mind was too busy racing in 100 different directions. Her first instinct might have been disbelief. This has to be a joke. He wouldn't just leave like this. He wouldn't just disappear without saying anything. But the truth was right there in black and white. I was gone. And I wasn't coming back. She must have grabbed her phone then, scrolling through her contacts, pulling up my number, hitting call. Straight to voicemail. Again. And again. I had already blocked her. She tried texting. Maybe something simple at first. Where are you? Before the messages became more frantic. What is this? What's going on? Then maybe something angrier. Andrew, answer me. You can't just do this. Except I could. And I had. Karen must have searched the house, trying to find something, anything that would tell her where I had gone. But I had been careful. No change of address forms left lying around. No bank statement showing new accounts. No notes, no explanations, nothing for her to cling to. She must have checked the garage, expecting to see my truck parked in its usual spot. Gone. Maybe that's when the panic really started to set in. Maybe she called my friends, my coworkers, my family, asking if they knew where I was. And one by one, they all told her the same thing. Andrew didn't say anything. He just left. Because that was the plan. No confrontation. No arguments. No dramatic scenes where she could cry and lie and try to manipulate her way out of what she had done. Just silence. I wonder how long she sat at that kitchen table, staring at those papers, realizing just how badly she had messed up. She had spent months sneaking around behind my back, thinking she was getting away with it. Now, she was alone. The house, once warm and full of life, probably felt cold and hollow. The man she had betrayed gone. The future she thought she had secured gone. The life she had taken for granted gone. I didn't need to hear her cry to know that she did. And I didn't need to be there to see her regret. Because I knew, without a doubt, that it had finally hit her. She had lost everything. And the worst part? I wasn't even around to watch her suffer. I never expected to hear from Karen again. When I walked away from our marriage, I did everything I could to make sure she wouldn't be able to find me. I closed accounts, changed my number, left no forwarding address. I cut off mutual friends who might be tempted to pass along information. I erased myself from her world because that's exactly what she deserved. For years, it worked. But one day, I found out she had been looking for me. It must have started small at first. Maybe she Googled my name, hoping to find a trace of me, a job listing, a social media account, anything. She would have come up with nothing. Then maybe she tried my old friends, the ones we used to have over for dinner, the ones who used to send us Christmas cards every year. I haven't talked to Andrew in a long time. They would have told her. No idea where he is. Because even if they did know, they wouldn't have told her. They knew what she had done. She must have reached out to my family, hoping maybe my brother or my cousin would take pity on her. But my family is loyal. They had seen what she put me through. They knew the pain she caused. She wasn't going to get anything from them. I can picture it. Karen sitting alone in that house, the same house we had built together, now just a shell of what it used to be. She probably pulled out old photo albums, ran her fingers over pictures of us at the beach, at family gatherings, smiling like we had the whole world ahead of us. She probably sat at that kitchen table, the same table where she had found my divorce papers, replaying every moment in her mind, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. And maybe, just maybe, she finally realized. It had gone wrong the moment she decided I wasn't enough for her. The moment she chose her little, writing retreats over the man who had loved her for 25 years. The moment she betrayed me and thought she'd never get caught. Now, she was the one left wondering. She was the one searching for answers. She was the one who had been abandoned. I wonder how long she kept searching. Did she hire a private investigator, like I had? Did she think maybe she could track me down, find me in some small town, Knock on my door and beg for forgiveness? Did she ever drive past my old job, hoping someone there would slip up and tell her where I had gone? Or did she finally sit in that empty house, staring at the life she had destroyed, and realize there was nothing left to do but accept it? That she had lost. That I was never coming back. I like to imagine the moment it really sank in. The moment she finally understood that I hadn't just left her. I had erased her. That no matter how many times she searched my name, she would never find me. That no matter how many times she tried to reach out, her messages would go nowhere. That I had moved on. That I was happy. That she had become nothing more than a ghost in my past, while I had built a future where she didn't exist. And that future? It was better without her. The divorce process was smooth, at least for me. Karen, on the other hand, fought. She tried to reach out through lawyers, sending desperate letters asking to talk before anything was finalized. She tried to stall, making excuses about needing more time. But I didn't play her game. She signed the papers, whether she wanted to or not, and when the process was over, she was left with nothing. The house. Sold. Our joint savings? Already moved before she even knew what was happening. Our marriage? Dead and buried. When the final documents arrived in the mail, I imagined she sat in that empty house, staring at them the same way she had stared at my divorce papers that night, stunned. 3 years. That's how long it had been since I walked out of Karen's life, without a word. 3 years since I left that house, since I blocked her number, since I made sure she'd never find me. In that time, I built a new life, a better one. I had a new town, a new home, a new career. And sitting across from me at that little cafe on a quiet Saturday morning was Emily. The woman who had helped me realize that love wasn't supposed to feel like doubt, that I didn't have to walk on eggshells in my own marriage. Emily was kind, gentle, honest, and unlike Karen, she actually saw me. She laughed at my stupid jokes, listened when I talked, reached for my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. We weren't just building something together, we were happy. And then I heard her voice. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then I saw her. Karen stood frozen a few feet away, staring at me like she had seen a ghost. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, her face a little thinner. But there was no mistaking those wide, shocked eyes. I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I just met her gaze and waited. Emily must have noticed the change in my expression because she turned to see what I was looking at. "Andrew," she asked softly. I gave her hand a small squeeze under the table. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Because Karen wasn't moving. She just stood there, her lips slightly parted, blinking like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Like maybe she had convinced herself I had disappeared off the face of the earth. And for her, I had. Then, she spoke. "Oh my God." Her voice cracked. "Andrew." I didn't answer. Her eyes flickered to Emily, then back to me. She took a shaky step forward, one hand pressing against her chest like she needed to steady herself. I can't believe it," she whispered. "You're really here." I just looked at her, waiting. She swallowed hard, glancing at Emily again before turning fully toward me. "Andrew, please. Can we talk?" Emily shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't move. "There's nothing to talk about." Karen's eyes filled with tears. Real tears this time. Not the kind she could fake, not the kind she used to manipulate people into forgiving her. "Please," she begged. "Just 5 minutes." I leaned back in my chair. "Why?" Her face crumpled. "Because I need to tell you how sorry I am." That's when the dam broke. She dropped to her knees right there in the middle of the cafe. People turned to look. Conversations quieted. The clinking of silverware slowed. And still, she knelt there, crying, shaking, begging. "I was wrong," she sobbed. "I was so wrong, Andrew. I ruined everything. I destroyed our marriage, and I hate myself for it." I didn't say a word. She clutched at the hem of my jeans like she was drowning. "Please, just let me fix this. I don't care how long it takes. I'll do anything. I'll wait forever if I have to." Emily shifted beside me, clearly stunned. The entire cafe was watching. A couple in the corner whispered to each other. A barista near the counter stood frozen, a coffee cup half filled in her hand. Karen didn't care. She was too far gone, lost in her own desperation. "Andrew," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please. I can't live like this. I need you." I let out a slow breath, then finally spoke. "You made your choice," I said coldly. "Now live with it." Her sobs hiccuped. She looked up at me, eyes wild with disbelief, like she couldn't fathom that I wouldn't forgive her. Like she had convinced herself that if she ever found me, I'd take her back. She had been wrong. I pushed my chair back and stood up, tugging my wallet from my pocket and tossing a few bills onto the table. Then I looked at the barista, who was still standing there with wide, uncomfortable eyes. "Call security," I said. Karen's face went pale. I didn't wait around. I turned to Emily, took her hand, and led her toward the door. She didn't say anything, just walked with me, holding on to me a little tighter than before. The last thing I heard before stepping outside was Karen's broken sobs as a cafe worker gently told her she needed to leave. I didn't turn around. I didn't care. She had spent years searching for me, hoping for a second chance. But I had already given my second chance to someone who actually deserved it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Andrew handled the situation the best way possible, or would you have confronted Karen before leaving? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.